A woman's knees hit the gravel. Her hand went out and caught nothing but air, and then the hot ground caught her instead. An old man dropped down beside her, shouting her name, pressing a canteen to her cracked lips. Around them the desert shimmered. Behind them 40 miles of empty highway, ahead 40 more. A dog stood over the woman, growling at the heat itself, dog tags swinging from his collar. The old man's hat had a name stitched across the front. His hands shook as he lifted her head. She was breathing, but barely. Cars blew past without slowing. Nobody stopped. Nobody ever stopped for two gray-haired strangers on foot in that kind of sun. His name was Harlan Cruz, and he had made a promise he did not know how to keep. What happened next outside that biker bar, nobody expected. Stay with me on this one. Harlan was 71 years old, and he had been walking since before the sun came up. His boots were the same ones he'd worn on the farm for 20 years. The soles were worn smooth, and the leather had cracked white across the toes. Every step sent a little jolt up through his bad knee, but he didn't stop. He'd learned a long time ago that if you stop, sometimes you don't start again. Beside him walked Ruth, 68, thin as a fence rail, with silver hair she'd pinned up that morning before they left. She'd put on her good dress. Isn't that something? They were walking 40 miles through the desert, and she'd put on her Sunday dress and her little clip-on earrings, because she said you don't show up to see your boy looking like you'd been dragged behind a truck. That was Ruth. Proud right down to the bone. And walking between them, low and steady, was Sergeant. An old blue heeler gone gray around the muzzle, one hip that hitched when he walked. He was 13 years old, which is ancient for a dog like that. He should have been asleep under a porch somewhere. Instead, he was out on that highway, matching them step for step, because that's what he did. Where they went, he went. On Sergeant's collar hung a set of military dog tags, steel, dulled from years of desert dust. They'd hung there since the funeral, 3 years back. Ruth had wanted them somewhere safe, and Harlan had said the safest place he knew was around the neck of a dog who'd sooner die than leave a Cruz behind. So that's where they went. And that dog had carried them ever since, clinking softly with every step, like a little bell that never stopped ringing. Now here's the thing you need to understand. Harlan Cruz did not walk 40 miles because he wanted to. He walked because there was no other way left. The farm was gone, not sold, taken. The bank had come the winter before with their papers and their padlocks, and they'd chained the gate on 40 years of Harlan's life. The truck went with it, hauled off on a flatbed while Ruth watched from the kitchen window. When the world takes your land and your engine in the same season, it doesn't leave you much. It leaves you your legs and your word. And Harlan had given his word. Their son was named Daniel, Corporal Daniel Cruz, United States Marine Corps, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. He'd grown up on that farm, riding in the bed of that same truck, teaching that same dog to sit. He shipped out at 19, tall and grinning, telling his mother not to worry. 3 tour. And then a folded flag and a headstone at the Veterans Cemetery 40 miles east, out past the mountains. Every single year on the anniversary, Harlan and Ruth had driven out to that grave. Every year. They'd bring flowers and a thermos of coffee, and they'd sit and talk to their boy like he was still there. It was the one thing that held them together, the one appointment they never missed. This year they had no truck, no money for a bus, no family clothes enough to ask, and the anniversary was today. Ruth had brought it up first. She'd said, real quiet over breakfast, "Harlan, it's Tuesday." And he'd known exactly what she meant. He'd looked at the calendar and he'd looked at his old boots by the door and he'd said, "Then we'd best get started early." That was the whole conversation. That's all it took. Because you have to understand something about people like Harlan and Ruth. When they say they'll be somewhere, they show up. Even if showing up means 40 miles on foot in June across the Mojave with a heart condition and a bad knee between them. Oh, that's the part I left out. Ruth was sick. She hadn't told the neighbors. She'd barely let herself say it out loud. But her heart was failing, and the doctor in town had used the kind of soft voice doctors use when they've run out of good news. Months, he'd said, maybe less. And Ruth had folded her hands in her lap and thanked him for his time like he'd fixed the plumbing. She wanted to see Daniel's grave one more time. That was the truth of it, not the anniversary, not the flowers. She knew, the way sick people come to know things, that this was likely the last visit she'd ever make, and she was not going to miss it because a bank took a truck. So Harlan carried the water, and Ruth carried her pride, and Sargent carried the tags, and the three of them went out onto that highway before the sun was even up. For the first 10 miles it wasn't so bad. Cool early, the sky still pink. They talked a little. Ruth pointed out a hawk, but the desert doesn't stay kind. By mid-morning the heat came down like a hand pressing on the top of your head, and the road ahead went to liquid and mirage. Harlan started counting Ruth's steps without telling her, watching how she breathed, watching the color of her face. They passed the last gas station at mile 15. Harlan had $11 in his wallet. He bought 2 more bottles of water and a can of dog food he opened with his pocket knife and set down for Sargent, who ate it in 4 bites and looked up for more. There wasn't more. Harlan scratched the old dog's ears and said, "I know, boy, I know, little further." By mile 20, Ruth had stopped talking. By mile 22, she was leaning on him. And somewhere around mile 24, out where the highway ran past a low cinder block building with a gravel lot and a row of motorcycles out front, her knees buckled, and she went down. "That's where you found us at the start. That's the woman on the gravel." Harlan got her into the strip of shade along the building's east wall. He got water on her lips and on the back of her neck. Her eyes were half open and not tracking right. Her skin had gone from red to a bad gray, and she'd stopped sweating, which anybody who's lived in the desert will tell you is the moment you should be scared. "Ruthie, stay with me now," his voice cracked. "We're almost there, don't you quit on me." And that's when Harlan Cruz lifted his head and really looked at where he was. The building was a bar. A biker bar. He could hear the low grumble of an engine idling and the thump of music through the wall. Out front, maybe a dozen big machines gleamed in the sun, all chrome and black. And leaning against them, sitting on them, standing in a loose knot by the door, were men. Big men. Leather vests over bare arms, arms covered in ink. Long beards, chains, sunglasses that hid their eyes. On the back of every vest was the same patch, the same winged skull, the same 3 words underneath. Harlan had lived long enough to know exactly what that patch meant. Hell's Angels. Now Harlan was not a man who scared easy, but he was 71, unarmed, half dead from the heat, with the woman he loved dying in the dirt and a 13-year-old dog for backup. And every instinct, he had said, "Keep your head down, old man, and don't ask these people for anything." But Ruth's breathing had gone shallow, and there wasn't another building for miles. And a man does what he has to do. Harlan stood up. His legs nearly gave. He steadied himself on the wall, and he walked out of the shade toward those men, into the full sun with his hat in his hands. The talking stopped as he came near. A dozen sets of hidden eyes turned his way. One of them, a mountain of a man with a gray beard down to his chest, pushed off his bike and stood up to full height, and Lord, he was tall. He crossed his arms. "You lost, old-timer," the big man said. Not mean, not kind either, just flat. Harlan's throat was so dry it took him 2 tries. "My wife," he said. "She's collapsed, the heat. We've been walking since before dawn." He gestured back toward the shade with a shaking hand. "I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for trouble. I'm just asking. Could the 3 of us rest here a while, in your shade, just till she gets her legs back? Then we'll be on our way and you'll never see us again." The big man looked at him a long moment. Then he looked past him at the strip of shade, at the gray-haired woman crumpled against the wall, at the old dog standing guard over her, hackles up, too tired to do more than growl. And then his eyes stopped, fixed on something, on Harlan's hat, because Harlan in his hands was holding his cap. And stitched across the front of that faded cap, in thread gone pale from years of sun, were the words, CPL Daniel CREWS 17 MARINES, MY Son MY Hero. The big man went very still. That your boy, he said. His voice had changed. Something had dropped out of it. Yes, sir, Harlan said. Killed in action 3 years back. The big man's eyes moved to the dog, to the steel tags hanging off that collar, catching the light. He took one step closer and read the unit number stamped into them, and Harlan watched the man's jaw tighten under all that beard. 17, the big man said quietly. He turned his head and called to the others, and his voice had gone rough. Hey, hey, everybody quiet. The music seemed to fall away. A dozen big men went silent. And the one with the gray beard reached up slow and pulled his sunglasses off his face. His eyes were wet. I was 17, he said. 91, Desert Storm, same battalion your boy carried on his back. He looked down at the tags again and his voice nearly broke. Old man, you get in that shade, right now. Diesel, get the woman water, cold water, and the wet towels from the cooler. Move. And just like that, the whole world changed. Men who a moment ago looked carved out of stone were suddenly moving fast, ducking inside, coming back with a cooler and towels and a folding chair. Somebody killed the engine that had been idling. A woman came out from behind the bar with a bag of ice pressed to her chest. They got Ruth into the shade, propped up gentle as could be, a cold towel on her neck and one on each wrist. The big man knelt in the dirt beside her in his leather and his chains, holding a water bottle to her lips, one careful sip at a time, murmuring, "There you go, ma'am. There you go. You're all right now. You're with friends." Harlan stood there in the sun with his hat in his hands, and for the first time all day he let himself breathe. They were safe. Somebody had finally stopped. His knees wanted to fold, and he let them, sinking down onto the folding chair. Somebody slid under him, and he thought, thank God, it's over. We made it. We found some good people, and we're going to rest, and she's going to be all right. He should have known better. Out in that heat, nothing is ever over that easy. Ruth's head lolled sideways. The water spilled off her chin. And then her whole body stiffened, her back arched off the wall, and her eyes rolled white. "She's seizing," the big man barked. "Diesel, Diesel." A younger biker shoved through the crowd and dropped to his knees. Lean, quick, tattoos up his neck, and a look on his face that was all business. He got 2 fingers against Ruth's throat, tipped her head, watched her chest. "She's not just hot," Diesel said. "Her pulse is all over the place. This ain't heat exhaustion no more, Tank. Her heart's giving out." He looked up at Harlan, and there was no softness in it now, only urgency. Sir, does she have a heart condition? Tell me straight right now, it matters." And there it was. The thing Harlan had been carrying alone. He looked at his wife, gray and shaking on the ground, and the truth came out of him in a broken whisper. "Her heart, the doctor said. He said she doesn't have long." His face crumpled. She knew she might not make it out here. She wanted to see him anyway. She wanted to see our boy one last time. The whole lot went dead quiet. See, this was the moment it stopped being a story about kindness and shade. Nobody out there was thinking about pride anymore, or about being polite to some strangers. Now it was a race. Now it was life and death in a gravel lot, 40 miles from nowhere, with the nearest hospital an hour away, and a woman whose heart was quitting in real time. Diesel didn't hesitate. "I did 2 tours as a Navy corpsman," he said, ripping open a first aid kit somebody threw him. "Everybody back, give her air. Tank, call it in, get a bird if you can, we don't have an hour." He had Ruth flat now, legs raised, ice packed at her neck and under her arms. "Come on, Mama, come on, not today. You didn't walk this far to quit on me now." And Ruth, old, stubborn, dying Ruth, she dragged in one ragged breath, then another. The seizing stopped. Her eyes fluttered, found Harlan's face and held there. Her lips moved, no sound, but he read it. He'd read those lips for 46 years. She was saying, "Daniel." "I know, Ruthie," he said, gripping her hand. "I know we're gonna get you there. I swear it." Diesel sat back on his heels, sweat pouring off him, and let out a long breath. Pulse is steadying. She's back, but she's not out of it, and she is not walking another step in this heat. That'd kill her for sure. Tank, the big gray-bearded one, was already on the phone, and his face wasn't good. He lowered it and said, "Ambulance is 45 minutes out. There's a wreck on the interstate, they're slammed. Choppers grounded for weather up in the pass." 45 minutes. In that sun. With that heart. Now I want you to sit with what these men were looking at. Two strangers. An old man and a dying woman and a beat-up dog who'd walked out of the desert asking for nothing but a little shade. They could have given them the water and pointed them back to the road and gone on with their day. Nobody would have blamed them. That's what most folks would have done. That's what all those cars did, remember. They blew right past. Let me stop here for 1 second because I think this is the kind of story worth sticking around for. If you're still with me, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps these stories reach the people who need to hear them. All right, back to that gravel lot. Because Tank made a decision. He stood up and he looked at Diesel, and he looked at the old man holding his wife's hand, and he looked at that hat and those tags, and he said something that changed everything. "We're not waiting on an ambulance in a parking lot," Tank said. "We're not doing that. Her boy's grave is, what, 15 miles east?" Harlan nodded, not understanding. "Then here's what's gonna happen." Tank's voice got loud, filling the whole lot, the voice of a man who'd led men before. "Bishop, you take the fast road, get to the county hospital, tell 'em what's coming and have 'em ready. Diesel, you're staying with her, you don't leave her side. The rest of you, listen up. This is a 17 Marines family and they've got someplace to be." He turned to Harlan. "Sir, we can't fix your wife's heart. But we can get her where she needs to go, and we can get her there safe, and we can get her there with an honor guard. If she wants to see her son, then by God, she is going to see her son today. And she is not walking 1 more inch to do it." Harlan's mouth worked, but nothing came out. They moved like they'd trained for it. Somebody pulled a truck around from behind the bar, an old crew cab with a mattress thrown in the bed. Gentle as nurses, 4 huge men lifted Ruth onto that mattress, Diesel climbing in beside her with the cooler and the kit. They lifted Harlan up next, and when he tried to say he could climb himself, 3 of them just looked at him until he stopped. Sergeant they lifted last, the old dog too weak to jump, and he settled against Ruth's side with his chin on her hip and those tags resting right over her heart. Then the engines started, all of them. A dozen motorcycles roaring to life at once, a sound you felt in your chest. They formed up around that truck, 2 out front, 2 on each side, the rest behind, a wall of leather and steel and chrome. Tank raised 1 fist in the air, brought it down, and the whole formation rolled out of that lot and onto the highway, headed east, toward the mountains, toward a headstone. And here's the thing. Once they were rolling, other bikes started coming. Somebody had made calls. From side roads and gas stations they came, joining the back of the pack, 5, 10, 20 more, until it wasn't a dozen anymore. It was a river of riders stretched half a mile down that desert highway, all of them riding escort for a dying woman and her Marines' dog tags. Traffic pulled over. It just did. Cars that wouldn't stop for 2 old people on foot now sat on the shoulder with their hazards blinking, watching this thunder roll by, and folks got out and stood by their doors. and some of them put their hands over their hearts without even knowing why. In the bed of the truck, Diesel kept his fingers on Ruth's pulse and kept talking to her, low and steady. And Ruth, she opened her eyes. She felt the wind and heard the thunder of all those engines, and she turned her head to Harlan and she smiled. Faint but real. "Harlan," she whispered, "you hear that? Daniel would have loved this. Our boy would have loved this so much." Harlan couldn't answer. He just held her hand and cried, the wind taking his tears sideways off his face. 40 years of a hard man's held back tears, out on that open road. They reached the cemetery gates in under 20 minutes. The riders throttled down, the thunder softening to a low rumble out of respect, and rolled slow through the gates and up the long lane between the white stones, hundreds and hundreds of them lined up perfect in the grass. A groundskeeper came hurrying out, then stopped, and took his hat off, and just watched. Tank knew right where to go. Turned out he'd looked it up while they loaded the truck. Section D, he led the whole formation to a stop along the lane, and the engines went quiet all at once, and the desert silence came rushing back in. Diesel and Tank lifted Ruth down together, careful, and set her in the folding chair they'd brought and carried her, chair and all, across the grass to the stone. Harlan walked beside her with his hand on her shoulder. Sargent limped along behind, tags clinking, straight to the headstone like he'd been there 100 times, and lay down in front of it and rested his gray muzzle on the grass. The stone was white and clean and simple. Corporal Daniel CREWS, United States Marine Corps, and the dates, 19 years between them. That's all a life gets on a stone. The dates and a name. Ruth reached out one thin, shaking hand and laid it flat against the warm marble, right over her son's name. And she started to talk to him, soft, the way she always had. "Hi, baby," she said. "Mama's here. I told you I'd come. I know I'm late. I know I look a fright, but I came." Her voice broke. "I brought your daddy, and I brought Sargent. He's got your tags. He's kept 'em safe all this time. And baby, I brought some new friends. You should see them. Some of the finest men I ever met. Your brothers near enough. They carried me the whole way. Can you believe it? Your mama riding with the Hell's Angels." And behind her, those men. Those big, hard, tattooed men who'd buried their own out of that same battalion. They stood in a half circle in the grass with their heads bowed and their hats in their hands, and there was not a dry eye among them. Tank stood at the head of the formation, and slowly he brought his hand up into a salute and held it, arm trembling, for the son of a Marine he never met but somehow knew. Ruth sat with her boy a long, long time. She told him about the farm and the bank, and how the hawks still nested in the old cottonwood. She told him his father still couldn't cook. She laughed and she cried, and the whole time her hand never left the stone. And Harlan knelt beside her in the grass in his cracked old boots and let her have every minute because he knew what she knew, that this was goodbye, not just to Daniel, to all of it. When she was done, she looked up at Harlan and said, "I'm tired now." "I know, Ruthie. But it's a good tired," she smiled at him. "We made it, we really made it." The ambulance found them there in the cemetery 20 minutes later. The riders had radioed the way. And this time Ruth let them load her up without a fight, because she'd done the thing she came to do, and there was nothing left she needed to hold on for. She lived 9 more days. Passed in her sleep in a clean bed with Harlan holding her hand and Sargent curled on the floor beneath her. The last thing she ever said to Harlan the night before was, "Thank you for getting me there." And he told her the truth. He said, "I didn't, they did." And she smiled and closed her eyes and said, "Same thing, honey, same thing now." Now here's what I need you to know about what happened after, because this is where a lot of stories would end, but this one didn't. Those men did not disappear once the story got sad. That's the part that'll stay with you. See, plenty of people are kind for an afternoon. Kindness for an afternoon is easy. It's the days after that tell you who somebody really is. Tank showed up at the funeral. So did Diesel. So did the whole chapter. 30 men in leather standing in the back of a little church. And when the pastor asked if anyone wished to speak, it was Tank who stood up, this giant of a man twisting his cap in his huge hands, and said, "I didn't know Ruth Cruz but for one afternoon. But in that one afternoon, that woman walked 40 miles across the desert on a dying heart to keep a promise to her son. I've known Marines with less spine than that lady had. It was an honor to carry her. And it'll be an honor to look after what she left behind." And they meant it. They found out about the farm, about the bank, the padlocks, the chained gate. And that chapter, along with a couple others up and down the state, they did something about it. They ran a benefit ride. Hundreds of bikes, an entry fee, a raffle, the works. Word got around, the way these things do, about the old couple and the Marine and the 40-mile walk, and the money came in from all over. It wasn't enough to buy the farm back, but it was enough to get Harlan a small place in town, paid clean, no bank, no chains. A little house with a porch, which was all he'd ever really needed anyway. Diesel put an engine back in an old truck and drove it over and left the keys in Harlan's hand and wouldn't hear a word about it. "Man shouldn't have to walk," was all he said. And every single year since, on the anniversary, they ride. Tank and Diesel and the whole chapter roll up to that little house in town, and they load Harlan up, and Sergeant too, while that old dog still lived, and they escort him out to Section D. Same road. Same thunder. 15 miles of open highway with an old man riding in the middle of a wall of leather and chrome, out to a white stone in the grass. Harlan's 80 now, slower than he was, but he still goes. He sits in his folding chair in front of 2 graves side by side, his son and his wife, and he talks to both of them. And behind him stands a half circle of hard men with their hats in their hands and their heads bowed. Sergeant's gone now too, buried out back of the little house, but those steel tags, the ones he carried all those years, Harlan wears them around his own neck now, right over his heart. The way the dog did. The way you keep the people you can't carry any other way. You know, I keep coming back to that gravel lot. To the moment an old man walked out of the shade into the full sun with his hat in his hands, scared half to death, and asked a dozen of the roughest-looking men in the desert if he could just rest a while. He was sure they'd turn him away. Sure of it. Everybody else had. But they read the name on his cap, and they read the number on those tags. And they saw 2 worn-out old people who'd walked to the edge of the earth to keep their word to a boy who kept his word to all of us. And something in those men, under all the leather and all the ink, something stood right up and answered. That's the whole thing when you get down to it. Ruth Cruz walked 40 miles to reach her son. She only made it because a stranger decided her promise was his promise too. And that, friends, is not a thing you learn off a hat or a headstone. That's a thing you either have in you or you don't. Those men had it in them. And because they did, a dying woman got to lay her hand on her boy's name one last time and hear the thunder of 40 engines and go out saying, "We made it. We made it." Rest easy now, Ruth. All of you rest easy. You earned it.